Lonesome George, the giant tortoise, caught people's attention when he was first brought out of the wild and into captivity. People were sad that he was the only member of his species. As a scientific community, we had hoped that there was more time with him as we were thinking about other ways to try to get him to produce offspring. He never really found much interest in the females that were brought in to be attractive to him. He had a relationship with the individuals who took care of him over decades in the Tortoise Breeding Center on Santa Cruz in the Galapagos. And when he died in June of 2012, they were devastated.
Moa was a giant flightless bird with a close resemblance to today's ostriches and emus. The only difference is that the moa had no vestigial wings. Before extinction, moas were once the largest birds in the world, standing at a height of 4 meters tops and weighing approximately 110 kilograms. They lived in present-day New Zealand, but were phased out by the arrival of the Maori people. That was about 700 years ago. Compared to most extinct animal species, this is quite recent. That means a good part of this bird is still intact. This makes it much easier to deduce more information with more accuracy. And what better information to uncover than the DNA? The DNA has been picked up from the preserved specimen of the bird as well as the eggshells. But for reconstruction purposes, researchers at Harvard University used a toe bone they picked up from a museum. The next step here is to get reconstructed DNA sequence into an egg, and then, hopefully, we'll be closer to seeing moas take over as the largest flightless birds. But that size also presents a challenge. The whole project will need a fairly large egg. Emu's egg seems to be a great option for this for now.
It was a subspecies of grey wolf that was smaller than its relatives in North America and other parts of Asia. The last of these animals was caught and killed in 1905. Did you know these wolves had a long history of being hunted? That was due to their behaviour of preying on horses. When rabies spread from dogs to the wolf population in the 18th century, the infected animals gained a reputation as man-killers. As a result, Japan made killing wolves a national policy, and they were thought to have been exterminated. But sightings of them have been reported ever since their alleged extinction. That's led many people to speculate if some of the animals might have managed to survive in the wild.
The Steller sea cow was a true gentle giant. Related to the modern dugong, these animals were cruelly wiped off the planet in as little as 25 years after they were initially discovered. Now, these amazing beasts lived in the stretch of ocean between Russia and Alaska, and they were formally discovered in 1741 by German naturalist Georg Wilhelm Steller. Steller and his crew were sent to the Bering Strait for an expedition, and it's here that they were shipwrecked on a small chain of islands. So with a bunch of time to kill as they waited for their rescue, Steller spent this opportunity to examine the wildlife that inhabited these islands. And it was during his time on these islands that he managed to find this incredible beast, which he called Steller's sea cow. These sea cows lived in shallow waters around the island, never coming on land but instead walking along the seabed where they grazed mainly on kelp. These animals were extremely docile too, not having any natural predators and having never seen humans before.
Woolly mammoth was around for maybe 500,000 years or more, and for much of that time it was overlapping with humans. Seeing a herd of woolly mammoths must have been a remarkable sight for our ancestors. I imagine that if one kept one's distance, they would be okay to be around, but you wouldn't want to get too close. It was a very successful species until it finally went extinct just a few thousand years ago. On this map we've plotted every mammoth fossil that we can date, and it shows first of all the huge range of the species right across Europe, across Northern Asia and into North America. But then, starting about 14,000 years ago, the mammoth range had started to contract. The last mammoth survived only on a couple of islands in the Arctic Ocean and died out there about 4,000 years ago, and after that they were...
The great auk was another one of those flightless birds that died out in the mid-1800s. They were about 30 inches tall with short wings that helped them swim underwater. and they were known as being utterly defenseless. They were killed by hunters for food and bait. They were also captured by sailors who often slaughtered them while moving them into the ship's holding areas. The last of the great auks was seen in England when it was caught by 3 men. They tied it up and kept it alive for 3 days, but when a big storm hit the area, they were convinced the auk was a witch that caused the storm, so they killed it. I guess man never knows the boundaries of his brilliance, or how far it takes to get there.
It was believed that saber-toothed tigers died out because food was scarce, but scientists have now looked at the fossilized teeth from 15 saber-toothed tigers and found that they lack the kind of wear pattern you'd expect to see in an animal that isn't getting enough to eat. According to the Huffington Post, a starving cat would likely gnaw every kill it found down to the bone, so its teeth would show a micro-wear pattern similar to what we see in hyenas. That wear pattern is missing from saber-toothed tiger teeth though, so the big cat's extinction probably wasn't due to a scarcity of prey. So what gives? Well, research by the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA suggests that it was probably a combination of a warming climate and human activity. Interestingly, humans and saber-toothed tigers coexisted for at least 1,000 years, and it was only when the climate started to rapidly warm that populations of megafauna, oversized animals that included the saber-toothed tiger, began to decline. After that warming event, much of the world's megafauna went extinct within a century. But why? It's impossible to say for sure, but the big wild card seems to have been, you guessed it, humanity.
Megalosaurus was one of the largest members of the deer family ever to walk the earth. Despite being called the Irish elk, it's actually not very closely related to either of the 2 species known as elk today. Instead, its closest living relatives seem to be either the red deer or the fallow deer. But we actually know a great deal about what Megalosaurus probably looked like in life because it inspired our human ancestors to immortalize it in art. It often appears in cave paintings dating to the late Pleistocene epoch, most famously in Lascaux and Cognac caves of France. And we know these figures represent Megalosaurus because of the one detail that the Ice Age artists took pains to capture: the animal's enormous antlers. Thanks to these depictions, we know a lot of other details about Megalosaurus that otherwise we never would have known, like that it had dark stripes that contrasted with its pale head and neck. And attached to its shoulders was a distinctive hump, probably made of fat because it's not on its skeleton. And of course, there were the antlers. At their largest, the antlers of Megalosaurus giganteus could reach 3.7 meters wide and weigh up to 45 kilograms. Even today, it holds the record for having the largest antlers of any deer.
This subspecies of zebra is no more. Native to South Africa, the quagga became victim to the hunting of early Dutch settlers and later by Afrikaners to provide meat and skins. Disappearing mostly in the 1850s, the wild quagga became officially extinct a few decades later, though some captured ones could be found in zoos. On August 12, 1883, the very last captive specimen died, writing the final entry into the lifespan of this impressive species.
We are reviving an extinct species of quagga, and that is for the benefit of future generations.
The thylacine, also known as a Tasmanian wolf or Tasmanian tiger, a medium-sized meat-eating mammal that as recently as the early 1900s lived on, you guessed it, the island of Tasmania. Unfortunately, local farmers liked their sheep more than the thylacine, and eventually they were hunted to extinction. The last known thylacine died at a Tasmanian zoo in 1936. But that isn't what makes the thylacine so interesting.
So if I was on the island of Tasmania and I walked up to one of these things, I would think it was a wolf or a dog or something like that.
It's actually a marsupial. So are kangaroos and koala bears and wombats, possums, things like that.
So this is more closely related to a kangaroo or a possum than it is to the wolf that it looks like in its anatomy and its shape.